I'm Chris, and I'm joined here today with the one and only Eric Wind. So Eric Wind is the primary owner and operator of windvintage.com. If you haven't heard of it, go check it out, especially if you're looking for your very first vintage watch.
For a lot of people, it's a great watch that fits their lifestyle. They can be made water resistant. They don't really need to baby it. It's automatic. You know, some people forget to wind their watch every day if it's a manual wind watch. And you know, it's really a watch that's an heirloom immediately. People understand it's a good place to start, and it's a watch you can enjoy the rest of your life without much issue.
Perfect, yeah. So let's just dive into what you have here.
Yes. For the purposes of the video, we're looking at 3 great options or entry points into the field of vintage Rolex. Which is I kind of define as 1990s and older for this case. I think one of the best starting points in the kind of under 5K range would be the Rolex Air-King. So we've got 2 examples of the Rolex Air-King reference 14,000, which I think is one of the best places to start in the world of vintage Rolex or your first Rolex. It's 34 millimeters in diameter, however it's extremely long lug to lug. This is actually my son Charlie's Rolex, and he picked it because of the blue dial, which he liked a lot. Here's an example with a black dial. There's also examples, of course, with silver dials that are very common. Very sleek, excellent watch. It wears extremely well on the wrist. Just a very durable, sleek watch, sapphire crystal. Don't really have to worry about scratching it. Excellent all-around watch you could wear every day the rest of your life and be happy.
I mean, you can consider this like, it's not really a vintage piece, right? It's
yeah, this is neo-vintage,
right?
1990s. It's very wearable. It's 34, but because of the longer lug to lug, it really wears more like 35 on the wrist. And I prefer these, honestly, to the newer Air-Kings, which are, of course, pretty garish and large and have the green and yellow logo and text. But I think this is really a classic watch.
No, I agree, and I think this is a great starting point for people just getting into vintage watches because it doesn't really look vintage, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's very much modern in this case.
This reference also was interesting because it was used for several corporate dials. We've got a Domino's Pizza Rolex that was given to typically franchise owners who hit their sales targets with engravings on the back of the initials. So this is also the reference 14,000. And then this was a Winn-Dixie for safe maintenance. Someone who worked at Winn-Dixie, they also had them for safe driving for the truck drivers. And again, for 10 years of safe driving or safe maintenance, in this case, you would get a Rolex. So these are fun. These have gotten extremely popular the last few years, so they're kind of typically outside of that $7,000 price range we kind of set as the top bar for the video, but you know, it's the same reference, literally just a logo on the dial, and it gives you a little feel for the watch.
Yeah, well actually my Rolex OP is this, but not with the Domino's dial. It's actually on the bracelet.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, that's great.
So yeah, fun fact on that thing.
You know, the honorable mention, we'll give the specific reference of the 14,000, but are the predecessor Air-Kings. Like this is the reference 5500, which they made from really a lot of the 70s and 80s Air-Kings are this model. And it's a beautiful watch as well. The lug to lug is shorter, so it wears a little bit smaller, but you've got the beautiful domed crystal. The reference 14,000 is a flat sapphire crystal. This is an acrylic crystal, but it's domed, which is beautiful. This particular example is a Tiffany & Co. Retail signature above 6 o'clock, so it's worth outside of our range. That adds to the value, but just an awesome watch, just very, very clean and easy to wear. This is one of the original Air-Kings, which is from the 1940s. It's a reference 4499, and these were really marketed to people, potentially pilots in World War II, which is why they came up with that. Rolex was playing up with a lot of different names like Air Tiger and Air Lion and different things during that time. And that the numerals are extremely cool in that model.
It's very Art Deco.
Yeah, it's a super cool. So that's kind of cool to see the origin of the Air-King and then go through to see it through the 1990s, early 2000s. This is the next reference I recommend, which is very similar to the reference 5500. They made them from the 1960s to the 1980s. Again, it's a little bit shorter lug to lug measurement, but extremely beautiful dials. This one has a blue mosaic dial, also known as a shantung dial. It looks like silk, almost glossy. Very interesting blue texture, and all the 1002s are chronometer rated, whereas the Air-Kings from that era through the 90s and early 2000s were not chronometer rated. Not that we really care that much, but the movement is a little bit better and went through more regulation than the reference 5500s from that era.
I was looking at this bracelet too. You have that rivets on there.
I love these bracelets. They're very, very light. They're extremely cool, very thin on the wrist. It's part of the charm of vintage watches for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
And then kind of honorable mention in this Oyster Perpetual category, we've got ladies 6718, which is, this one is in really mint condition, but these are, under $4,000, sometimes under $3,000. This has a blue dial, really a beautiful watch. And this is an older Oyster Perpetual, reference 6332. There's a whole series of many, many different Oyster Perpetual references. And again, we're talking under $5,000. This has a super unusual patented dial from the 1950s.
Where do we start with this?
This is kind of the most expensive of what we're looking at, a vintage Rolex Datejust, in this case the reference 1601, which has a fluted white gold bezel for the steel models. For the gold model, of course, it's 18K yellow gold bezel. 1601 is just a classic kind of quintessential Datejust made from the 1960s through the 1970s. These do not have a quick set date. The successor references do. You can get really interesting. They typically have a pie pan dial where the outer track is sunken. They just have really, really beautiful dials. This example is kind of a blue sunburst finish. This is a black confetti finish where if you look at the dial closely under a loop, it's got flecks of red and different colors, blue and things, but looks kind of like a matte black from a distance. There's just a whole variety of dials. I mean, of course, the most common is silver, but there's not really a big premium to get a special, dial. Linen dials as well that are very interesting. And we're talking again for an unpolished example, which collectors prefer unpolished examples with full lugs, with a full crisp definition on the bezel for under $7,000 typically. This example in two-tone happens to have a Khanjar dagger on the dial, so it's a bit more expensive. This was from the Sultanate of Oman, but this example without that, again, would be under $7,000 without that dial. You want a really good case, you want a dial free of marks, you want a bracelet that's not super stretched. Sometimes these things, there's such a huge gap between each link, it's not a very enjoyable experience on the wrist, and you kind of worry about it disintegrating or falling apart when you're wearing it. So really condition is the mantra when it comes to buying one of these.
Yeah, I mean, you basically wrote the book on what to look out for in vintage watches,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And you always emphasize about the condition, whether on the case, bracelet, especially the dial, because that's where majority of the value is held within the dial.
Exactly.
Right? In terms of like things being polished, what's your take on that? Like, would you rather have things not polished at all?
Yeah, in general. Particularly, these are not super thick lugs, so as soon as they hit a polishing wheel during a service, the lugs get much, much thinner. You can lose 30% or more of the essentially width of that lug, and then it starts to look like toothpick lugs, as we call them, where they're just too thin. It doesn't look as nice on the wrist. You almost worry about the integrity of the watch. That was part of the reason Rolex switched to the maxi cases for the subs, for the GMTs and things, and part of their kind of private marketing around that was that the watch could be polished 10 times without issue. So it's something they think about. These older cases are much more kind of delicate and petite, perfectly fine for everyday intense wear, but they do not look as good when they've been polished 3 times. For sure, at that point, it's gonna not look great. And kind of the honorable mention of these are the quickset models, which again, are not really different in terms of value. I can show you. This is a 16014, which is the immediate successor reference. And this has a little bit thicker bracelet where the profile looks like a D, and the case is overall a little beefier to accommodate the quickset movement. This is a 16030, which is this version with a steel engine turned bezel versus the white gold fluted bezel. I also like the 1603s, which are like the 1601s, but with this style of engine turned bezel. They're just all fantastic watches. I tell people all the time, if you're looking for that kind of 7,000 and under price point and looking for something that someone's gonna like and respect if they don't already have a Datejust, it's a great watch for any collection. Yeah.
Why would someone go over the engine turn bezel over traditional fluted?
The only reason I like it as well, it's a little bit stealthier. It doesn't catch the light the same way. It just depends if you want to kind of impress people, because they'll see the gold bezel probably a bit more, and some people like that classic look. If you're in my mind's eye, when I think of a Datejust, I think of that bezel, or when I think of a Date-8, I also think of that bezel. But they don't make the steel engine turned bezels anymore. That's also cool. When you see that, you know it's an older watch.
I know a lot of people that want to collect things outside of the box, and I think something like this would be perfect.
Yeah, exactly. That was it.
Is that it?
Yeah.
Are there another few pieces?
I meant to say these as kind of honorable mentions. Another kind of honorable mention for the Air-Kings are the date models. And some of the Air-Kings actually have this style of bezel as well, the 14010, where it's got this overhanging engine turned bezel. But some people like that Air-King profile but want a date, and there is the reference 15200 or 15200. That's essentially the exact same as the Air-King but with a date, and then you've got other versions that have a date with this engine turned bezel as well. So again, we're talking under $5,000 for these models. It's a 15010 and this is a 15210. So this has a sapphire crystal, that's got the acrylic crystal. This is from circa 1988-89, and this is from about 10 years later, like circa 1998.
These are excellent pieces.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you, because I just acquired this very pristine Citizen bullhead.
Yeah.
I don't know what the guy did. Maybe he didn't wear it, or he was very careful about wearing it over his cuff and all that. For people just getting into vintage watches and they just acquired a very clean example of whatever that they're getting into, should they wear it and just go on about their day as if it was like a normal sport watch, especially on the the bracelet and all that, or should they be careful with it?
The beautiful thing about all of these watches is if they're sold by a competent dealer, you want to ask if they're water resistant. We try to make everything we sell in the world of vintage Rolex water resistant, as well as modern Rolex, so you can kind of wear it. These are very durable bracelets. As we tell people, don't just throw the watch around and treat it badly, but if you treat it well, it should last for hundreds of years, which is not like a lot of other things in our lives these days. I think if you just treat it well, set it on a soft cloth or a soft pad when you go to bed at night, but just be careful with the watch.
Well, it looks like it's that time to end the video. So if you really enjoyed this video and enjoy Eric Wind, be sure to stay tuned for another episode with just Eric Wind himself on this channel.
Can I have my watch back now?
Yeah, I really like this thing.
Thank you.
All right, well, I'm Chris. This channel is Clicky Bezel, and I hope to see you on the next one. Was that good? You're happy because you got your pieces in there.
He didn't get any yet. Yeah.